Hello, esteemed gentlemen? The child who learned to stay silent grew into the adult everyone misunderstands. Let that sink in. Because what if I told you the quietest man in the room, the one who never seems to fit in, never chases crowds and always walks alone, wasn't born that way? He was shaped in silence, forged in chaos, built by betrayal, neglect, and emotional war zones no one ever talks about. Fact, studies show children who are more introspective and emotionally neglected are more likely to develop hyper-independent personalities later in life. Sound familiar? But here's the twist. This isn't some superhero origin story. No radioactive spider, no tragic bat cave. This is real-life pain hidden under a calm face, the kind of trauma that doesn't scream, it whispers, in cold detachment, extreme self-reliance, and the refusal to ever need anyone again. And while society loves to label these men as mysterious, enigmatic, or alpha but not alpha, they were once just kids who felt too much in a world that didn't feel back. Welcome to the side of Sigma males that nobody talks about. Their childhood trauma, not the cool kind, not the romanticized lone wolf myth, but the raw, uncomfortable truth, the emotional scars beneath the silence. Number 1. They learned that silence is safer than truth. They learned early on that speaking the truth wasn't safe. Every time they tried to be honest about their feelings, their thoughts, their pain, it backfired. Maybe they opened up to a parent who used it against them later. Maybe they tried to explain how something hurt them, only to be told they were being dramatic or disrespectful. Or maybe their truth just didn't fit the story their family, school, or society wanted to hear, so they stopped talking. Not because they didn't have anything to say, but because the price of saying it was too damn high. This is where silence became their weapon. Not silence out of shyness, not silence because they didn't care, but silence as strategy, silence as protection. Because when the truth gets twisted, ignored, or punished often enough, you start to treat it like a loaded gun, something you keep hidden unless absolutely necessary. And that's the thing about Sigma males. They're not silent because they don't feel. They're silent because they've felt too much. They've watched how honesty can wreck you in a world full of fake smiles and fragile egos. They've learned that telling the truth can make people hate you, fear you, or use you. So instead of talking, they observe. Instead of sharing, they study. And instead of trying to explain themselves, they let people assume, because assumptions are less dangerous than confessions. But here's the kicker. They never really stopped telling the truth. They just stopped telling people. Their truth lives in how they move, what they refuse to tolerate, the boundaries they set without a single word. Their silence says more than most people's noise ever could. And yeah, it makes them look mysterious, untouchable, even intimidating. But that look, it's just armor, built over years of watching their honesty backfire again and again. So when a Sigma male stays quiet, don't assume he has nothing to say. Assume he's been through enough to know that not everyone deserves to hear what he really thinks. And the few who do, they had to earn it. Because silence isn't weakness. For him, it's survival. Number 2, they were forced into dual lives. From a young age, many Sigma males realized that being fully themselves in public wasn't an option. The world around them didn't welcome complexity, depth, or unfiltered honesty. It punished it. So they adapted. Not by changing who they were, but by splitting into 2 versions of themselves. The one they showed the world and the one they kept locked away. In public, they wore a mask. They played the part that made others comfortable. Polite, quiet, agreeable, invisible if needed. They learned how to nod at things they didn't believe in, laugh at jokes that weren't funny, and keep their real thoughts buried behind neutral expressions. Because when they tried to show their true selves, the ones full of questions, intensity, and depth, it was too much for most people. It got them labeled as weird, arrogant, antisocial, or even threatening. So they built a separate world, a private one. Inside that world they could breathe. They could think without judgment, dream without interruption, and feel without consequence. It became their emotional bunker, a space where their real identity could survive without being constantly misunderstood, criticized, or reshaped to fit in. But here's the brutal truth. Living a double life comes with a cost. It's exhausting. It's isolating. You start to wonder if anyone really knows you at all, or if they just know the version you let them see. And over time, that divide between who you are and who you're forced to be gets harder to live with. You start to feel like a ghost in your own life, present, but not fully there. For Sigma males, this duality isn't about deception. It's about survival. It's about protecting the parts of themselves that the world keeps trying to break or reshape. But deep down, they crave authenticity. Not attention, not approval, just the rare chance to exist without editing themselves. And until that chance shows up, they'll keep wearing the mask, quietly, carefully, while their real selves wait in the shadows, untouched, unbroken, and fully awake. Number 3. The trauma of having to raise themselves. For many Sigma males, childhood felt less like being raised and more like being left to figure life out alone. Sure, their parents were there, maybe even under the same roof every day, but emotionally, they were ghosts, detached, distracted, or completely consumed by their own problems. These kids weren't guided. They were ignored, overlooked, or expected to just know how to deal with life, even when they were barely old enough to tie their shoes. So they stepped into a role they were never supposed to play: their own parent. They had to make decisions most kids never think about. No one taught them how to deal with emotions, how to navigate conflict, how to ask for help, or even how to trust others. They learned everything the hard way, through mistakes, through rejection, through silence. When they got hurt, they cleaned their own wounds. When they were confused, they figured it out or learned to pretend they understood. When they felt pain, they buried it deep enough to keep functioning. They became hyper-independent, not because it was admirable, but because they had no other choice. Depending on someone meant disappointment. Expecting comfort meant getting let down. So they stopped expecting anything at all. And this type of upbringing leaves a permanent mark. It creates a man who doesn't trust easily, not because he's cold, but because experience taught him that trust is dangerous. It creates someone who second-guesses every need, every emotion, every instinct, because no one was there to validate them when it mattered most. Even as adults, Sigma males carry that silent blueprint, the one that says, if you don't handle it yourself, no one else will. And while the world might see them as stoic or strong, they know the truth. That strength was built in the absence of support, forged in solitude, and reinforced every time they had to pick themselves up without anyone noticing they had fallen. This is the kind of trauma that doesn't scream or bleed. It just builds quietly, into walls, into routines, into a life lived with one hand always holding the line, because no one else ever did. Number 4, forced to be the strong one too soon. A lot of Sigma males were handed a role they never signed up for: the rock, the anchor, the one who never breaks. And the worst part? It happened when they were still kids, still figuring out how the world works, still needing reassurance, safety, and permission to not have it all together. But instead of being allowed to feel, they were told to man up, stop crying, toughen up, be strong, be the man of the house, even if they were only 8 years old. So they learned quickly that vulnerability wasn't safe. Showing fear, sadness, or confusion got them shamed, ignored, or mocked. Maybe their father looked at them with disgust. Maybe their mother leaned on them emotionally, expecting comfort when they needed it themselves. Whatever the case, they got the message loud and clear. Weakness is dangerous. Emotions are liabilities. And if you want to survive, bury that soft part of you deep where no one can touch it. So they did. They built a controlled detachment that looked like strength. They became the calm in chaos, the quiet presence in a storm, the one who never complains. And to everyone else, they seemed mature beyond their years. But inside, they were just kids forced to carry emotional weight no child should ever lift. It wasn't growth, it was survival. And that early conditioning never really leaves. Even as adults, Sigma males struggle to open up. Not because they don't want to, but because it feels unnatural, almost dangerous. Like letting their guard down will invite pain, weakness, or failure. So they keep it all locked in, wrapped in a silence that looks noble, but was born from trauma. Number 5. Betrayed by adults who preached morality, then lied. Sigma males didn't become skeptical loners for no reason. They watched the adults around them speak in polished morals, recite rules, and demand obedience. Then turn around and break those same rules when no one was looking. Parents who demanded respect but disrespected their kids. Teachers who punished honesty but rewarded conformity. Leaders who preached honesty and discipline while living double lives. And when you're young, that kind of betrayal hits hard. It doesn't just disappoint you, it confuses you. You start questioning everything. Is anyone honest? Are rules real? Is morality just a performance? This betrayal shattered their trust in people, systems, and appearances. It's why so many Sigma males don't fall for status, titles, or flashy authority. They've seen too much behind the curtain. They know how easily people pretend to be good while doing the opposite. So they stopped listening to what people say and started watching what they do. They built their own code of ethics, not based on what they were taught, but on what they saw. And that self-made code, it's usually stricter, purer, and far more consistent than anything they were raised with, because it came from the pain of being lied to. That's the Sigma male's reality. Trust was broken early, and they never forgot who did it. Number 6. The soul-crushing pain of being misunderstood. There's a kind of pain that doesn't leave bruises or scars, just silence. That's the kind of pain Sigma males lived with as kids. They weren't just the quiet ones, or the weird ones. They were misread from day one. Misunderstood in a way that cuts deeper than outright rejection. Because instead of being seen for who they were, people projected their own assumptions, fears, and insecurities onto them. If they liked being alone, they were called antisocial. If they questioned things, they were labeled rebellious. If they didn't follow the crowd, they were told they were arrogant or trying to be different. But none of that was true. They weren't trying to be anything. They were just being, authentic, honest, curious. But in environments that only accepted what was familiar, simple, and easy to categorize, their complexity made people uncomfortable. And instead of trying to understand, people chose the lazy route, slap on a label and move on. Parents tried to box them into roles, the troublemaker, the ungrateful one, the too sensitive child. Peers either ignored them or mocked them. Even teachers sometimes mistook their quiet thoughtfulness for disengagement or defiance. So they started to shrink. Not physically, emotionally. They pulled inward, not because they didn't care, but because they learned that being seen usually meant being misinterpreted. And the worst part? Deep down, all they wanted was to be understood, not praised, not pitied, just understood for who they actually were. That hunger for connection never really disappeared, but it got buried. And in its place, they built distance, guardedness, self-reliance, because when you're misunderstood long enough, you stop expecting anyone to get you. You start keeping everything important to yourself, not out of spite, but as a form of protection. And while the world now sees them as mysterious, detached, or hard to read, the truth is painfully simple. No one ever bothered to listen closely enough to see the real them. So they stopped trying to explain and started living like ghosts in their own story. Fully present, but deeply unseen. Number 7. They had to make peace with being the black sheep. Some Sigma males didn't just grow up feeling different. They grew up being treated like a problem. Not because they caused chaos or sought attention, but simply because they didn't fit the mold. They asked the wrong questions. They saw through the family lies. They didn't play along with the unspoken rules, and for that, they were labeled the black sheep. But here's the truth. Being the black sheep isn't some edgy badge of honor. It's lonely. It's confusing. It's being in a room full of people who share your blood, yet constantly feeling like you're speaking a different language. Every time you act from your true self, it triggers someone. Every time you speak your mind, someone accuses you of ruining the peace, as if the peace wasn't just a fragile illusion held together by silence and pretending. And the worst part, you're often blamed for things you didn't do or punished for things you didn't even understand. You become the scapegoat, the emotional punching bag for everyone else's projections. If a sibling lashes out, somehow it's your fault. If a parent is unhappy, it's because you're difficult. Over time, you stop defending yourself, not because they're right, but because no one's listening anyway. So you retreat, you disconnect. You learn to expect nothing from the people who are supposed to understand you the most. And eventually, you make peace with being the outsider. Because trying to belong in a place that demands you betray yourself is its own kind of hell. This is how a Sigma male's lone wolf nature begins. Not from arrogance, not from superiority, but from exhaustion, from rejection, from being told over and over that who they are is somehow wrong. And instead of fighting to prove otherwise, they walk away quietly, permanently. They stop chasing connection where it doesn't exist. They stop trying to earn love that's always conditional. And they build a life outside the herd. Not because they don't want belonging, but because they've realized they'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded in lies. Number 8, labeled too smart for their own good. Many Sigma males grew up hearing the same backhanded phrase over and over, "You're too smart for your own good." But what that really meant was, you see too much, and it makes us uncomfortable. These were the kids who couldn't blindly follow rules that made no sense, who asked why one too many times, and who noticed contradictions adults hoped no one would. They weren't trying to be rebellious. They weren't showing off. They just couldn't unsee the nonsense. The teacher who preached fairness but played favorites. The parent who demanded respect but gave none. The traditions that everyone followed but no one could explain. When they pointed these things out, they weren't met with curiosity or respect. They were shut down, labeled as difficult, cocky, or worse, as if intelligence combined with awareness was some kind of threat. And that's the thing. They were a threat. Not physically, but intellectually, emotionally. They threatened the fragile egos of adults who didn't want to be questioned. They challenged systems that relied on obedience, not insight. So instead of being nurtured, their minds were treated like problems. Their honesty was framed as attitude, their critical thinking as rebellion, and their need for truth was painted as arrogance. So they learned to stay quiet, to keep their insights to themselves. Not because they were wrong, but because being right too soon came with consequences. They watched others get rewarded for going along, while they got punished for thinking too much. But that early alienation shaped them. It sharpened their instincts. It taught them to rely on their own judgment, not the crowd's. And it built the core of the Sigma mindset. Silent observation, deep analysis, zero tolerance for BS. Now, as adults, they still question everything. They still see through fake authority, shallow trends, and emotional manipulation in seconds. And while people may still call them aloof or arrogant, the truth is simple. They've just been seeing clearly since day one, and they've learned not to expect applause for it. Number 9, early intimacy with existential emptiness. While other kids were afraid of ghosts in the closet or the dark hallway at night, Sigma males were lying in bed at 10 years old, staring at the ceiling, quietly wondering why the hell they were even here. Not in the dramatic, performative way, but in a deep, almost eerie kind of stillness. They weren't scared of death. They were unsettled by the pointlessness of everything. The rituals, the routines, the empty conversations. Even as children, they could sense that most of the world was running on autopilot, doing things because that's just how it's done. And that awareness hit them way too early. While their peers were obsessed with cartoons or fitting in, they were watching how adults lied to themselves, how people filled their lives with noise and distractions to avoid feeling the void underneath. It wasn't depression, it was awareness. A quiet confrontation with the fact that most things felt meaningless, artificial, and staged. They didn't talk about it. Who would understand? Try telling a teacher or a parent that the concept of forever terrifies you, or that birthdays feel fake, or that you're pretty sure most people are pretending their way through life. You'll either get a pat on the head or a therapy referral. So they kept it to themselves, and developed an emotional loneliness that no one around them could see, let alone name. That early intimacy with existential emptiness didn't crush them, it formed them. It made them seekers, observers, philosophers in hoodies. They didn't chase distractions like others. They wanted truth, realness, depth. They couldn't fake happiness just to belong, couldn't force belief just to feel safe. And while this kind of early existential awareness made them seem weird or too intense, It also gave them a kind of inner clarity most people never reach. They saw through the masks, questioned the norms, and rejected the script before they even finished middle school. So when you meet a Sigma male and sense that quiet, almost unnerving depth in his eyes, that's not just personality. That's the residue of staring into the void way too young and coming back from it with a mind that no longer settles for shallow answers. Number 10. Abandoned during emotional breakdowns. There's a painful irony to being a Sigma male. They often had to be their own emotional lifeline. When the pressure of life finally became too much, when everything, the loneliness, the misunderstood thoughts, the overwhelming weight of carrying it all alone, reached a breaking point, they didn't get the help they needed. Instead of finding comfort or compassion when they were at their lowest, they found silence, or worse, judgment. If they cried, they were told to toughen up. If they showed vulnerability, they were called weak. When they finally cracked under the weight of everything they'd been holding in, no one was there to catch them. Instead, they were left to deal with it on their own, or worse, punished for having a breakdown at all. It's as if their pain was an inconvenience. And in that moment of emotional collapse, they realized a harsh truth. The world wasn't a safe place for their humanity. People couldn't be trusted with their cracks, not because the world was cruel, but because it was conditioned to believe that vulnerability was a flaw, not a sign of needing help. So they learned quickly to never let anyone see them break. They built emotional walls that were near impenetrable, layers of control and detachment that kept the world from noticing when things were falling apart inside. No more tears, no more signs of weakness. They mastered the art of suffering in silence, of appearing strong even when every part of them felt shattered. But the real cost was hidden beneath the surface. While they learned to keep up appearances, to mask their true feelings behind a composed exterior, the emotional toll was brutal. It bred a kind of isolation that few people could understand, the kind that feels like a heavy weight on your chest, where the more you try to reach out, the further you feel from connection. And that's how they kept surviving. Not because they were stronger than anyone else, but because they had no choice. The emotional breakdowns, they became a silent war, fought inside their own mind. And if you've ever been abandoned in your darkest moments, you know that war doesn't end until you're too tired to fight it anymore. But the Sigma male learned to fight it alone, because at some point they realized that no one would show up when they were broken. They'd have to put the pieces back together themselves. Number 11. The rage was buried, not cured. The rage that lives in the heart of a Sigma male isn't the kind you see on the surface. It's not explosive or outwardly violent, but it's there, buried deep, simmering beneath the calm, controlled exterior. It's a quiet kind of rage, the kind that doesn't scream but festers, and it's there for a reason. Because they've spent a lifetime swallowing injustices with no one to stand up for them. When they were younger, they learned early on that life wasn't fair. People didn't play by the rules, and when they tried to stand up for what was right, they were either ignored or dismissed. No one had their back. No one cared enough to step in and fight their battles. If they were wronged, it was their problem to deal with. If they were hurt, it was their responsibility to heal. So they learned to hold it all inside. At first, it hurt. At first, the world felt like an unfair and cruel place. They internalized those slights, those wounds, those moments where they were ignored or left to fend for themselves. But over time, something changed. That hurt turned into a low, constant simmering of anger. And instead of it destroying them, they began to use it. The rage didn't go away. It couldn't go away. It became their fuel. It wasn't that they were angry all the time, far from it. But when they set their sights on something, a goal, a dream, a desire, they could tap into that rage and turn it into relentless motivation. It became their hidden weapon, driving them to work harder, go further, and prove that they could thrive in a world that never gave them a fair chance. The rage didn't burn them out. It kept them moving forward, always pushing, always striving, never stopping. They didn't need validation, and they didn't need anyone's approval. The injustice they'd faced became the very thing that propelled them toward success. And as they rose, they did it quietly, calmly, with a focus that felt unshakable to those around them. But deep down, that quiet rage still smoldered, and it was the secret ingredient that gave them the strength to keep going, no matter what. Number 12. They were trained to be lone wolves by wolves. The narrative around Sigma males often suggests that they choose to be lone wolves, that it's some kind of preference, a cool, independent stance they've taken to separate themselves from the crowd. But the reality is far darker and more complex. Sigma males didn't just decide one day to stand apart. They were shaped into lone wolves by the very people who were supposed to protect them. It started with betrayal. Maybe it was a parent who failed to show up when they needed support, a friend who turned their back at the first sign of trouble, or a mentor who offered guidance only to use them for their own benefit. Each instance was a lesson in trust, sure, but more importantly in self-reliance. It was as if the world had silently conspired to teach them that relying on others would only lead to disappointment. The message was clear: don't trust anyone fully because no one will show up when it matters most. Next came neglect. Not the kind you might expect. Neglect isn't always about physical absence. It's often about emotional abandonment. No one noticed when they were struggling. No one cared to ask the right questions or offer the right kind of help. So they learned, not by choice but by necessity, to handle everything themselves. They grew up without the emotional guidance others got. They weren't coddled through their mistakes, they were left to face them, alone, and figure it out on their own. It wasn't an option for them to need anyone, because they'd learned that needing someone meant being let down. And then there was the psychological warfare, the subtle manipulation, the emotional games, the mental gymnastics that left them feeling like they were never really seen for who they were. They were trained to believe that showing weakness was a mistake, that any display of emotion or vulnerability could be used against them. So they built walls, not just to keep others out, but to protect themselves from being exploited, abandoned, or controlled. In the end, Sigma males weren't born loners by some romantic choice. They were created by a life that taught them, time and again, that survival meant standing apart. Pain became their trainer, and the isolation they endured became their armor. They were forged into wolves by wolves. And now, being alone isn't just something they choose, it's something they know they have to do to protect themselves. And though it might look like freedom from the outside, it's really the result of a world that taught them that no one else can be trusted to stand by their side. In the end, the Sigma male isn't simply the result of choosing solitude, he's a product of the world's harshest lessons. He didn't wake up one day and decide that being alone was the best option. He was made into this version of himself by betrayal, neglect, and pain that few ever truly understand. The loneliness, the guardedness, the quiet rage, they all tell a story of survival, not arrogance, of navigating a world that time and again showed him that relying on others was a dangerous game. But here's the beauty in it. Despite being shaped by circumstances most wouldn't wish on anyone, the Sigma male turns those wounds into strength. What others see as coldness is, in reality, a calm exterior built from years of emotional storms. What appears as detachment is the product of a mind that's learned to trust itself above all else. They might walk alone, but that journey has made them the masters of their own fate. In their solitude, they've discovered a kind of inner peace that no amount of external validation could ever replace. So when you see a Sigma male standing apart from the crowd, know this: it's not a choice born out of arrogance or superiority, but one forged in the fires of hardship and self-reliance. He's the product of a world that broke him, and a mind that refused to bend. And in that, there is power, a power that, no matter how isolated he might appear, no one can take away. If you found this deep dive into the world of Sigma males fascinating, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the conversation. Drop a like if you feel the power of the lone wolf mindset, and share this with anyone who needs to understand the quiet strength behind being misunderstood. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so comment below and let's keep the discussion going. Whether you resonate with the Sigma journey or have your own take, your voice matters. Thanks for watching, and remember, The journey to understanding yourself is the most powerful one you'll ever take. Stay strong, stay true,